Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I love ringing that gong. And welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Ron Richard, President and CEO of the Cleveland Foundation and a very proud member of the City Club. And I'm overjoyed and deeply honored to introduce today's speaker, Isabel Allende, the 2017 Anisfield-Wolf Book Award winner for Lifetime Achievement. And her lifetime's not even over yet. And her achievements are certainly not over yet. We were so proud to celebrate this honor at the awards ceremonies just last night. And I must add that Isabel Allende has long been my personal foremost literary superhero. And so I am just thrilled to welcome her here to the City Club today. And I'd like to say I am also thrilled to welcome her wonderful colleagues who came with her, who are such wonderful human beings. The Anisfield-Wolf Book Awards were established in 1935 by Cleveland poet and philanthropist Edith Anisfield-Wolf to recognize books that have made important contributions to our understanding of racism and bigotry, and our appreciation of the rich diversity of human cultures. The Cleveland Foundation, the world's first community foundation, has administered the awards since 1963, and for the past few years, we've been proud to partner with the City Club to provide a forum for winners of these distinguished awards. Isabel Allende is the most widely read author writing in Spanish, having sold more than 67 million books translated into more than 35 languages. Born in 1942 in Lima, Peru, to Chilean parents, she burst onto the literary scene in 1982 at the age of 40 with The House of the Spirits, which began as a letter to her dying grandfather. Over the course of her career, she's written more than 20 books, ranging from plays to children's books to memoirs, including the acclaimed nonfiction work, Paula, that memorializes her late daughter. Ms. Allende has received numerous awards for her work, including the Chilean National Prize for Literature and the Library of Congress Creative Achievement Award for Fiction. In 2014, President Barack Obama awarded Ms. Allende the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. And more than 3.5 million people have watched her TED Talk on leading a passionate life. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming the 2017 Anisfield-Wolf Book Award winner for Lifetime Achievement, Isabel Allende.
Thank you. Sit down. No. Sit down. Look, they gave me only half hour. If you stand up, then I won't be able to finish this thing. I'll read very quickly. Not long ago, I heard Anthony Doerr talking about how he spent 6 years, or I don't know how many years, putting together images, memories, and ideas to write his bestseller, All the Light We Cannot See. And it was a fascinating insight into his brain and imagination. And that got me thinking about my own creative process. I've been writing for 35 years, and I have no idea how I do it. Often, I don't have an idea what the book is about until it's published and I read the reviews. No, seriously. I thought I was writing a novel about the gold rush, Daughter of Fortune, until I read a critic that explained that it was really about feminism. And I thought that Island Beneath the Sea was a novel about slavery in Haiti 200 years ago. But after reading a certain review, I realized that it was about absolute power, a theme that has always obsessed me. And I will explain that in a few minutes. The creative process is a mystery. In the last few months, I have been editing, publishing, and revising the translation into English of my new novel, In the Midst of Winter. This has given me the opportunity to think about my creativity and try to unravel its mysteries. Good luck with that. I have written several books in a fog, so I just surrender to the mystery and trust that if I show up every day in front of my computer, eventually the book will get done. Stories are in the air. They exist all around us, everywhere, and they need to be told. I'm just an instrument. I provide some skills, work, and attention to the subtle connections between people and events. With that raw material and some discipline, my books come to be. A book usually starts with a small idea, maybe just a place and time, or a sentence overheard in a restaurant. I take notes on napkins in restaurants, or a scene in an old movie. I could live with those images forever, floating in my mind without exploring them, as most people, normal people do. But I become very restless. The story is knocking at the door. The inspiration for a novel is just an intention, like dreaming to climb the Everest. It doesn't mean that it will get done unless I make a commitment. It's like falling in love. The feeling is great, but you have to act upon it. Do I always have a plan for a book? No, not really. But there is something in the air, and if I pay attention, I will perceive it. In most cases, all I have is a feeling or a vague idea that will evolve and change completely in the months to come. That's why I can't talk about the book in progress, because whatever I write today may be deleted tomorrow. Trial and error. The first few weeks, I'm lost. But if I show up daily to work, something will happen, and the temperamental muse of literature will eventually show up. The book really gets going when the characters surprise me. The characters are real people that exist far away, or existed in the past, or will exist in the future, and my job is to find them. As my clairvoyant grandmother would say, we are surrounded by presences, the living, the dead, and those who will be born, all mixed up in an eternal present. There are many dimensions of reality, and everything happens simultaneously, but our limited brains can only perceive some aspects of the incredible complexity of the universe and of life. I started writing fiction when I was almost 40 because I ran out of options. Yeah, I was living in exile in Venezuela. I really wanted to be a chorus girl, but I don't have the legs. I was living in exile in Venezuela. My marriage wasn't going anywhere. I had a very stressful and boring job. My children were getting ready to leave the nest, and my hair was falling out. My life, I felt, was a failure. On January 8th, 1981, I started a letter from my grandfather who was dying in Chile. I adored that old man. He taught me all the things that have served me in life, that introspection was the equivalent of vanity, that whining and complaining produces cancer, and discomfort is healthy. He favored cold showers, tough meat, bumpy mattresses, and sturdy shoes. If one survives that kind of education, one grows up to be grateful for even the most insignificant pleasures, like water coming out of the faucet. I expect things to go wrong. When there is no stress or pain for a few days, I get very anxious. But I'm not completely neurotic. I'm a very easygoing person. As a matter of fact, it's a delight to be with me. I don't need a lot to be happy. Warm water coming out of the faucet usually does it. The letter to my grandfather got out of hand, and a year later I had 500 pages on my kitchen counter. It looked like a manuscript. The House of the Spirits had been born. It was such a lucky book that I have started all my books on the same date, January 8th. Having a sacred date to start works like magic. What began as superstition is now discipline. I prepare my calendar, my life, and my heart for that morning in January when I will lock myself away to write. I will begin a book no matter what, even if I'm sick, or my computer breaks down, or Harrison Ford calls for a date, which I'm still waiting for. And once I have lit a candle, said a prayer, taken a deep breath, and written the first sentence, which is always the hardest, the joy takes over, and the rest is just pleasure. Allow me to give you an example of how I write. My new novel, In the Midst of Winter, was published in Spanish in June and will come out in English next month. And this is how it came to be. It was December 2015 in Brooklyn. The weather was so warm that people were walking around in short sleeves and flip-flops. It looked like Christmas in Jamaica. I had rented a brownstone to spend the holidays with my family and some friends. We were having breakfast and someone asked what I was going to write in a few weeks. And I had no idea, and I was beginning to panic. Write about this house, somebody said. Write about the neighborhood, said a friend, and she told us bloody stories about Italian mafia that owned many of the houses there when she was growing up. Write about me, added another friend who is a scholar. Weird one. Write about refugees, said Lori, my daughter-in-law who's sitting there, who runs my foundation and gets to see tragic cases among our grantees. After the holidays, I returned home to the Bay Area where I live, and January 8th came, as it usually does. What material did I have? A brownstone in Brooklyn, maybe a corpse or two, a finicky professor at NYU, an undocumented immigrant. Not too much for a script. But a script has never worked for me. In 2005, I had to come up with a script for my novel Zorro, because the character is owned by Zorro Corporation, and they needed to be sure that I would respect the hero and treat him properly. I could not dress him in a pink tutu, or make him Bulgarian, or vegetarian for that matter. They approved the script, but for the life of me, I could not follow it. When I start a book, I imagine that I enter with a candle into a large, dark room where the story and the characters are hiding. I walk slowly, and the flimsy flame of the candle illuminates bits and pieces of what hides in the darkness. I have to guess the rest. It's a very uncertain and slow process. I find myself in dead alleys all the time. The faces change constantly. It seems impossible to make sense of the capricious information I get. But day by day, I bring enough light into that space. The characters appear full-bodied with their voices, their names, their personality, and they start telling me who they are and what happened to them. I cannot change the story. The story has its own dynamic. I enjoy happy endings, for example. Ideally, my characters would get married and live happily ever after, but that never happens. In real life, it doesn't, and in my novels, it doesn't either. Characters in a novel are like people, complicated, contradictory, unreasonable, but always their actions have to be consistent with who they are. You can't have an angry, obese, uneducated neo-Nazi volunteering in a homeless shelter. I know, in real life it may happen, but it can't happen in a novel. Fiction has to be believable, while reality seldom is. The characters move the story forward. I may have a linear, simple plot, but as I get to know the characters, the plot changes dramatically. Sometimes it takes a surprising turn, and I find myself in a totally different situation. That's when I know that the novel is really working, that the characters have taken over. Some years ago, I wrote Ripper, my first and only and probably last crime novel. I had attended several mystery writers' conferences and heard the masters talk about how they construct the plot. They plant the red herrings to distract the readers, and how they plan the ending and they create suspense. I could do none of the above. I started with a murder because I had heard that you need a body in the first 5 pages. It felt good. Then I thought I needed a detective, but that was too predictable. So I used a group of kids playing a game online who would solve the case. And then what? I was on page 20. I added another murder. And so I went on, chapter after chapter, adding bodies and gruesome crimes that the smart kids investigated. I was having a great time. I'm sure that everybody dreams of killing somebody, usually a relative. In my case, it was a spouse. I became an expert in weapons, knots, arrows, knives, and poison. My husband, my former husband, was always watching me closely, and he started eating all his meals out. By then, I was getting to the end of Ripper, and I had a bunch of bodies scattered here and there, and a lot of blood, several suspects, and not even the smart kids in the video gaming business could untangle the mess. I had to go back to page 1 and draw a chart to follow the intricate plot and remember who the victims were. Then I had to connect the dots, I mean the corpses, and decide who the assassin would be, something that I should have had clear from the very first page. I had to plant the clues along the manuscript and define the perpetrator's method and motivations. In the last scene, I'm telling it because no one of you is going to read it. So I'm not giving anything away. In the last scene, I had a young female victim crucified in the bowels of an abandoned army base, while an amputee Navy SEAL and his war dog, a deaf Belgian Malinois with titanium fangs, tried to save her. Lots of suspense and a tragic finale. To this day, my readers complain because the Navy SEAL died. He was the hero, for Pete's sake. He should have married the crucified young woman. But I had to choose between killing the soldier or the dog. What would you have done? I'm telling you all this because it illustrates how my mind works. It goes in circles and spirals. Some fiction writers, particularly authors of thrillers and mystery novels, think linearly and plan the whole book before they put down the first sentence. Good for them. I scramble in the darkness. I write a scene or a dialogue, then I read it aloud and I don't like it and I keep on working. And when finally I have reached a point where I think it's okay, there's a sigh of relief, and then I have to tackle the next page. So it's never ending. Let me go back to it in the midst of winter. I told you that Christmas 2015 was unnervingly warm in New York. But a few weeks later, by January 22nd, 2016, and that's last year, a terrible blizzard hit several states in the East Coast. Worst recorded weather in New York since 1869. Millions of people ended up without electricity, gas, means of communication, or transportation. Wonderful news for me. This was exactly the glue I needed to glue together the loose elements of my story. A brownstone in Brooklyn, 3 unlikely characters trapped in a snowstorm for 3 days. Who are they? The prissy American professor is the owner of the house. The tenant in the basement apartment is a Chilean female journalist. What brings them together? A young Guatemalan refugee who faces a life and death situation. It's the beginning of 2016, long before Trump was even a candidate, and no one was talking about building the Great Wall of China to protect us from invaders and deporting 11 million people. But the plight of refugees was in the collective consciousness, and it was a priority in the work of my foundation. And then I stumbled upon a quote by Albert Camus that says, "In the midst of winter, I finally found within me an invincible summer. That quote resonated with me because after my divorce and the death of my agent and the death of 3 of my best friends and of my dog Olivia, I felt I was stuck in a personal winter, as the characters in the book were. Writing about their respective winters, I overcame my own winter. Something needed to happen to those characters and to myself to find the invincible summer that we all have inside. I would live with those 3 characters for many, many months, a whole year, exploring their past, finding out who they really are, what they wanted, what their mission in the world was. And the exciting work began for me then. I researched about snowstorms, real estate in Brooklyn, gangs in Guatemala, politics in Brazil, academic bureaucracy in NYU, which is the worst, military coup and dictatorship in Chile, breast cancer, and much more. 1,000 pieces of a puzzle were scattered in front of me. Each piece added shape, color, and meaning, and when the pieces were all in place, I marveled at the invincible summer that was revealed in the heart of the story. It is not a coincidence that my last 2 novels, The Japanese Lover and In the Midst of Winter, deal with older people falling in love. That's important for me at this stage in my 70s. I want love, passion, and romance like any teenager, but Match.com is not for me. No one will ever be interested online in a bossy, short Latina grandmother. Now, if I get to meet a guy I like, well, that's a different story. I grab him by the neck or whatever other part of him is available, and he doesn't have a chance. It happened last year. An innocent widower heard me on NPR in New York and started writing to me. Every day I got a good morning message and a good night one. It became addictive. This went on and on for 5 months. I started depending on those messages like a crazy teenager. So 5 months later, we finally met because I had to do something in New York, and that was the end of the widower's innocence. He invited me out for dinner, and during the main course, I asked him what were his intentions, because I was 74 years old and I had no time to waste. He choked on the ravioli. But I have to say he reacted bravely, because most American males would have run out of the door. So very soon he will be moving to California with me. Yes. I hope it works. You know, we humans are sexual and sentimental creatures to the very end of our lives. This idea makes my grandchildren cringe. There is consistency in my beliefs, my writing, and the way I lead my life. And there is continuity and consistency in the themes I write about and the people that inhabit my pages. Inside me still lives the same girl and the same young woman I was before. I still lust for life, I'm still ferociously independent, and I can still fall madly in love. I'm passionate about the same causes and ideals that moved me half a century ago. I write about strong women that overcome terrible obstacles, about absent fathers, about love, loyalty, courage, death, violence, about the people who are silenced and those who are not protected by the big umbrella of the establishment, the poor, the desperate, the foreigners, the disabled. But no matter how dark the circumstances may be, the characters survive. They are never depressed or bitter, just the opposite. They manage to be or to become strong and joyful. I'm not an unreasonable optimist. I'm a cautious realist. My characters are modeled after real people. 20 years ago, I created a foundation to honor my daughter Paula, whose premature death broke my heart. The mission of the foundation is empowerment of women, because a woman who is not in control of her own body and fertility, who is illiterate and has no skills to support herself and her children, and who suffers violence and exploitation, is usually destitute and victimized. If a woman is empowered, her children will not starve, and her family will be better off. If families prosper, the village prospers, and eventually so does the whole country. The poorest and the most backward societies are always those that put women down. Through my foundation, I have heard incredible stories of survival and met strong and resilient women, those that are portrayed in my books. I don't need to invent them. I mentioned the themes that keep coming back in my stories, and I want to say something that is essential for me. Once a journalist asked me in an interview what I feared the most, and I replied without hesitation, power with impunity. This is why I wrote Island Beneath the Sea, a story of absolute power, the power of the master over the slave. I fear those who have power to abuse, violate the law, lie, manipulate, practice corruption, even torture and kill with no accountability. I know what I'm talking about. I have experienced it, and I can recognize the signs. It happened on a memorable day, September 11th, 1973 in Chile. On that day, we had a military coup that ended a century and a half of democracy in my country. On that Tuesday, September 11th, the power of an illegitimate government with total impunity began and lasted for 17 long years. It wounded the society so deeply that the scars are visible 40 years later. Abuse of power and the power to abuse is always present in every society, and given the opportunity, it takes over. It has happened even in the most civilized nations, the Nazis in Germany, the fascists in Italy and Spain, the communists in Russia, and so forth. It can happen anywhere. This kind of power takes over all branches of government, including the fourth branch, the press. It has an excuse, of course. It is protecting the homeland. It is protecting you, the citizens, from a terrible enemy, your own fear. This kind of power only works with fear. Fear paralyzes and isolates people so they become easy to control. Power with impunity is clever. It chips away your rights one by one, and soon you have lost a way of life that before you took for granted. In Chile, the military terrorized the population with the excuse of protecting it from the threat of communism. The military were defending the Christian Western culture, as they called it. In the name of national security, people were arrested indefinitely, and they had no right to defend themselves. Torture became a common practice. Prisoners were killed in captivity, and their bodies were destroyed. They were called desaparecidos. Legally, they were not dead. They had never existed. Lucia, the Chilean journalist in my book In the Midst of Winter, has a disappeared brother. Their mother will spend 35 years looking for him. Abusive power defines reality, and no one dares to question it. It decides who the enemy is and what the rules are. The rules change all the time to fit the interests of those in power. First, the enemy is a foreigner. In Chile, the enemies were Cubans and Russians. Then the enemy is within the country. It can be hiding anywhere. And finally, total paranoia takes over. Those who are not with me are against me. So, ladies and gentlemen, beware of power without accountability. And this leads me to, I will finish, don't worry. He's so impatient. And this leads me to justice, another theme that has obsessed me for decades. In several of my books, the characters are confronted by violence or abuse but they cannot expect justice. Official justice can be cruel and unfair. It is severe to the weak and the poor, while it seldom punishes the powerful. But in life, sometimes natural justice brings a sense of balance. If we live long enough, as I have, we can see how most circles close. Our actions, good and bad, have consequences. In my stories, you will find the healing balm of restorative justice, of retribution and forgiveness. At the end of In the Midst of Winter, the protagonists judge the situation from the angle of compassion and opt for natural justice. Remember, I told you about my novel Zorro, written in 2005? Why would an aging woman spend a year researching and writing about a masked Californian hero, the guy we all know? Well, first because I wanted to meet Antonio Banderas, of course, from the Zorro movies. But mainly because Zorro is by definition the hero of restorative justice. He fights for the disempowered against the establishment, and in doing so, he defies the law. I have the fantasy that given the right circumstances, I can be like him. Deep in my heart, I can be Zorro. I want to make this world better. Not only better, but to make it almost perfect. Yes, I know it's a very arrogant and ambitious proposition, but if we do not imagine perfection, how can we even begin to achieve it? However, if I add my strengths and subtract my weaknesses, I feel dismayed. In reality, the only weapon I can handle is the written word. No Zorro mask, whip, or sword for me, just a keyboard. But I hope that my books will contribute to bring people together, good, strong, committed people, maybe people like you, and that we will join our forces, first to imagine, and then to attempt to achieve an almost perfect world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Go that way.
No, I don't think I need to stand up there. No. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're enjoying a Friday Forum with Isabel Allende, recipient of the 2017 Anisfield-Wolf Book Award for Lifetime Achievement. I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive of the City Club. We're about to begin the audience Q&A, and we welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, and those of you joining us via our radio broadcast, our webcast, our live simulcast at the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Humanities Center at Cuyahoga Community College, and wherever you might be. If you'd like to tweet a question, you can tweet it at the City Club, and our team will work it into the program. We want to remind you that your question should be brief and to the point. You can also leave a question in the comment section of our Facebook Live feed. Holding our microphones today are our Membership and Customer Experience Manager, Corey Isler, and Youth Forum Council Chair, Tiolu Orsanya. May we have our first question, please?
Okay, thank you. Don't be shy.
Please tell us about your clairvoyant grandmother.
My clairvoyant grandmother was wonderful. She was totally crazy. She would have been in an institution, but her husband, my grandfather, adored her and sort of protected her. She has become a sort of legend. I grew up hearing stories about her. I don't remember if I ever saw it, but they say that when I was still in diapers, she would sit me at the three-legged table where she would call the spirits in her seances. And it's not really a three-legged table. It's a massive Spanish table with a huge foot of 3 or 4 lions, which is now in my house. And according to the legend, she would move it without touching it. In my house, I can never move it to wipe the floor under it. So I don't know how she did it. But I grew up with her imprint, with the idea that everything is possible, that we don't know the answers, that there's mystery everywhere. And all that was handled with humor and lightness. Nothing was somber or dark or heavy or scary until she died. And then when she died, my grandfather went into mourning for 8 years. He dressed in black from head to toe. He painted the furniture black. And the house went into a silent mode. There was no radio, no parties, no dessert, no flowers. So I grew up with the absence of this extraordinary grandmother in the world and her incredible presence in the world of the spirits. So I go back and up and out and down all the time. Sorry.
Thank you so much for sharing your wit and wisdom. And I'm sure you hear this all the time, but you are clearly an amazing storyteller,
Oh, thank
as
you.
evidenced by your message here today. So I'd like to ask you a little bit about your character development. I believe you said that as you get to know your character, your stories develop. So how is it that you engage with your character in a way that those stories and themes develop?
Often my characters are based on someone that I know. I look for models because I tend to portray characters that they all speak like me, and that wouldn't work. So let's say in Ripper, the novel I was telling you of, the crime novel, I needed a soldier. I know nothing about the military. I don't have any soldiers in my family, so I looked for one. And while I was creating the character, a person who works with us, Sarah Kessler, she found a Navy SEAL that was part of the team that took down Osama bin Laden. And this man who was willing to talk to me. So she and I came to Washington and spent 3 days with him. So I didn't have to invent much, just interview him, research, observe him. He took us to his apartment and showed us some photographs and stuff. While he was showing the photograph, I said I needed to go to the bathroom. Because of course in a bathroom you open the cabinet and you find, yeah. And then it was a small apartment, so I peeked into his room. What kind of sheets this guy has? So that's the kind of detail that will create a character. And that shifts the story in incredible ways. Because this Navy SEAL, who was a tough guy that had been a Navy SEAL since he was 18, had the hands of a pianist, very delicate women's hands. That was so totally unexpected. And I thought, well, this is just wonderful. The dog, for example. I love dogs, and my dog would not have titanium fangs and be deaf because of the bombs, but this is a real character, a real war dog. So all those things come from the real world, and that is why the characters, as they evolve and as I know more about them, they move the story. They take the story in directions that you could never imagine.
Hi, my name is Zulma Zavala. And those who know me know that I love to ask the difficult questions, especially in this forum. However, today I just want to say thank you, because your beautiful words and message are the wisdom and inspiration I needed today. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hola, mi nombre es Marieli. I grew up in a house that instead of juice, we have a lot of rum, and instead of shusha, we have a lot of intilimani, and instead of lullabies, we have Allende. So that just tells you how big of a neurotic family it was. Whatever you write, we will always read it. You have earned that. We know that, even the ones that you kill, the Navy SEAL. But who else we should be reading? Who you read, who we should know, who else we shouldn't.
We should be reading. You know what? I am in touch with publishers, with booksellers, and I get a lot of books, sometimes in manuscript, sometimes in advanced reader's copies. Sometimes people just tell me, I mean, my editor or my publicist or someone says, you have to read this novel. And every day I'm discovering new authors that I hadn't heard of before. And maybe they are not new, but I hadn't heard of them. And finding the extraordinary work of, unfortunately, there are so many good writers out there. I mean, it's very unfortunate that I have this horrible competition. And no matter how much I write, there will always somebody better. So I could not say a name. I would say ask your booksellers, the librarian, the friends that like to read. Those are the people who will tell you what to read. And it always changes.
I am always glad when I see Latinos and Latinas excel, and obviously you're excellent.
Oh, thank you.
I'm very grateful today because outside of the birdcage, nobody puts a Guatemalan character in there. So As a native Guatemalan, thank you for that.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I don't know if you would like my portrait of this character. I love the character. I know a person, or several like her. But the situation in Guatemala today is so terrible for the poor people who live in the villages, and they have to confront the gangs and the narcos and the violence and the corrupt police and all that forces them out. I mean, we in the United States tend to think that people come here following the American dream. They want to live on welfare or something. They come because they are escaping. No one, and I know this because I have been a political refugee, no one leaves what is familiar, what you love, your family, your home, your country, your language, everything that you have earned in a lifetime. You don't leave it because you're following the American dream. People have not heard of the American dream outside. What are you talking about? People come because they are looking for a life. They are running away from violence, from extreme poverty, from war. There were no Syrian refugees before the war started in Syria. Why do we have millions of Syrians looking for a political asylum? For the same reason we have millions of people looking for asylum in the United States. This country is huge, huge, and we have so many resources. There is space for many people, and we have to open the heart and our nation. The more we close ourselves, the less we are. Sorry. I get totally passionate with this because as I see the cases in my foundation, one by one, I don't see numbers. I don't see millions. I see one by one what happens to people. What happens to a child that has come here when he was 3 or 4 years old, doesn't know another country, doesn't know another language, and he's not allowed to stay. And where will he go? He doesn't have another place to go. No, it's a terrible situation.
Thank you for being here today and giving us this wonderful hour. I put on my Facebook page that I was coming to see Isabel Allende today, and this is from my friends. Merci, Dakashane, Abrigato, Arigato, Gracias, and Cheche.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Big hug for your friends.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking for us today. You mentioned earlier that you base your characters off of real people, so I was wondering if you ever find yourself reflected in any of your characters that you write.
Well, it's a very good question because I've heard that authors are in every character. I never intentionally portray myself in a character, but why do I choose to write about that person in particular? Why does the character have to say that? Because they're speaking for me. And in between the lines, even if I never try to preach or give a message, I hate that. When I'm reading fiction and I see that the author is trying to teach me something, I get really upset. So I consciously never try to do that. But the person you are as an author comes between the lines. It's unavoidable. What you believe, what you fear, what you dream of, all that is there in the characters and in the story. So am I in the stories? Probably yes. Not as me personally, but the things I believe in or matter to me.
If I may be permitted, 2 questions, one short, one I hope will be a lengthy answer. The short question is, do you feel or would you feel welcome returning to an extended stay in Chile today? The second question, you have described how you research real life to base your characters upon. Have you considered writing nonfiction, and what would the difference be?
Yeah. First question, I have a foot in Chile. I go there all the time, and a foot here. My parents are still alive. They are 101 and 97 years old. So I'm condemned to a long life, which is a horrible thing. So I keep going. But I don't think I will move to Chile because my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren, my lover, they are all here. And my lover doesn't speak a word of Spanish. What would he do in Chile? Then, what was the other question? What was it? I have written nonfiction. I have written 2 personal memoirs, and I will never write another one because I promised my son I wouldn't. And I have written nonfiction, a book about Chile, a book about aphrodisiacs and love. So I move a little bit between fiction and nonfiction, and I'm much more comfortable in fiction. I began as a journalist, and I was a lousy journalist because I could never say things as they are, just the facts. The facts don't mean anything. There's a story behind the facts, the alternative facts. So, so I'm always into the alternative facts. And the difference is, to me, that I research for everything. But when I research for fiction, I have the freedom to transform all that information into a story. When I work with nonfiction, then it's just what I have to say that is about that I cannot invent. And my mind tends to invent stuff. I also invent people, which is very, very dangerous. I tend to create in my mind virtues on people that often they don't have. That happens with husbands a lot.
Thank you for your humor and your insight. When you talked to us about sleeping for democracy, that was something that really spoke to me, and I could relate to your feeling about getting water out of the tap, having been raised in Romania in the 80s. I wanted to learn a little bit more about you as a child, how you grew up, who you were. Would you be able to tell us about that?
Yeah, I was, my mother married very young against her father's wishes with the wrong man, my father. And when I was 3, my father abandoned the family. In Chile, there was no divorce. So the only way that my mother could be free was doing an annulment of the marriage, which could be done if you paid fake witnesses and the judge and whatever. It was very easy to do it, if both parts consented. And my father consented to the annulment with the condition that he would never see his children again. So I never saw my father. I saw my father only once, and that was when I had to identify his body in the morgue, because he died of a heart attack in the street. So I grew up, my mother found herself at 24 with 3 babies in diapers. And she returned to live in my grandfather's house, in my grandparents' house. And so my mother was protected by the family, but she was poor. She didn't have any means of her own. She didn't have any skills to work. She was depressed. She was always sick. So it was a very difficult situation for her. And the house of my grandfather, which was luminous when my grandmother was there, became this mausoleum when she died. And so I grew up the first 10 years of my life in that house, which in a way was very useful. At the time, no one paid much attention to children. They were mildly neglected, and it was fine. This obsession that parents have today with protecting their children and overpraising them. I mean, they make 2 lines in a piece of paper and you put it in the refrigerator. And when my grandchild came with a duck that I have to put in the refrigerator, I said, "This is lousy. You can do better than this." And so the parents get really upset about that. So I grew up to confront life as life really is. And I was a very solitary child in a house of males, reading a lot. The only thing I could do was read. There was no television, there was no radio, there was no movies. And then my mother married my stepfather. And my stepfather was a diplomat, so we ended up traveling a lot. And my adolescent years were in Lebanon, in Beirut, at a time when girls didn't go out. We were at home and at school. That was it. It was so isolated and so out of it that I heard about Elvis Presley when he was already fat. So So that gives you an idea how out of it I was. I never heard of rock and roll or anything like that. So that's why I feel that today everything is bonus, that everything comes just like a gift. And I'm very happy, therefore. I don't have any sense of entitlement because my grandfather nipped that in the bud.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you for your delightful presentation.
Thank you.
My name is Merle Johnson, and I taught language arts for 40 years in Cleveland. And it seems the longer I taught, the more technology became popular, the less my students wanted to write. So my question to you is, how in the world would you motivate a room full of reluctant writers?
I don't want more writers. Why would I want more writers? It's interesting because it's true that the kids like the screen and they like the phone and they like the technology, but more people are writing, more books are being published, more readers are appearing everywhere. We thought that the book as an object would disappear with the technology and with the audiobooks and with the digital book. It's not happening. They are still there, and more books are published. And why are they published? Because people read. So I wouldn't worry so much about those kids. Just kick them in the butt. I mean, don't respect the kids so much. Hola.
Hola. You're multilingual and you write in Spanish. How do you feel about your work when it's translated into other languages, and what your initial relationship to the word is when it's translated? How does that work for you?
Well, I can only read the translation into English. My books are translated into 35 languages. Sometimes I get a book and I don't know if it's mine or not, because I can't read the alphabet and there's no photograph, and I don't even know which way the book goes, backward, upward, I don't know. So I don't know if it's my book. So the only translation that I check word by word is the English, and I have been really lucky with that, because I had for 19 books I had the same translator, Margaret Sawyer Peden, and then I have had other translators for the recent books, and they have been great, absolutely great. I can find in the translation when, for example, irony is missed, or humor, that kind of thing, but in general the work they do is excellent. Talking about how irony is lost sometimes, it's a cultural thing. What works in one language as humorous or ironic or sarcastic may be totally offensive in another language. The same thing happens with love scenes. In Spanish, we have a whole language for amor. I mean, many words, many forms of expression, and it's fine. In English, it will be so tacky, even suspicious. So you have to be really trust that the translator, when they tone it down, they know what they're doing.
Good afternoon. Thank you so very much for your presentation. I was really taken by how you spoke about the empowerment of women, and I wonder, how does that translate into the foundation, the work at your foundation, in terms of in charity? There's a lot of charity and good intention, but not really understanding the impact of that. And so, does that empowerment, how does that translate into your foundation's work?
Well, my foundation is run by Lori here, and she could answer your question better than me. But we help finance programs and organizations that work with women. We do not do the work in the field. We help to finance. And Lori and her team follow up on every grantee. So we know them by name. We know them personally. Lori evaluates the work that is done and what happens with the money. And only in a couple of cases, I think, in all these 20 years of work, have we had to cut someone off because it wasn't working. Sometimes we do because the program is finished or because the program has achieved the goal that they wanted. And so we are very close to the work, but we don't do it ourselves. And that's how we get to meet these extraordinary people. I don't feel at all that we just make checks and they go and that's that. No, it's a very hands-on work. And we see the results. Sometimes in some places with very little money and a lot of work, you can change somebody's life, many people's lives. And that's what we try to do. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.
You're amazing. Thank you so much. Today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a Friday Forum with Isabel Allende, recipient of the 2017 Anisfield-Wolf Book Award for Lifetime Achievement. Our forum today is our way of participating in Cleveland Book Week, a project launched by Anisfield-Wolf and the Cleveland Foundation. We're very grateful for the opportunity to participate. Today's forum is the John W. Barclay Memorial Forum, made possible by a generous gift from the estate of John W. Barclay. We have guests with us today from Squire Patton Boggs in recognition of this special forum. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's forum is also part of the City Club's Authors in Conversation series, supported in part by residents of Cuyahoga County through a public grant from Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. Thank you very much for your support, voters. And CAC, of course. Community partners for our program today include Cleveland Book Week and the Flora Stone Mather Center for Women. We thank you for your support in promoting today's forum. That brings us to the end of our program today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Ms. Allende. Our forum is adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.